Time for us to get started. And we are, I think, ready to begin chapter 26 tonight. We may be a minute ahead, but we'll redeem the time. We're here already anyway. In Genesis 26, we're going to study tonight, and we are going to kind of turn the focus a little bit back to Isaac, but really it's carrying the story of Jacob and Esau forward, and so we'll notice that as we begin. So just to review just quickly so that we can make some headway tonight. In 26, 3 and 4, what are the promises that God repeats to Isaac that he had made to Abraham? We haven't talked about 20. We haven't talked about this yet, but I want to preview what's coming. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so in 26, 3 and 4, he repeats the land promise, he repeats the nation promise, and he repeats the seed, the blessing promise. So we knew that was coming, right? We knew that was coming because what has happened is with Ishmael being driven away, with the sons of Keturah being driven away, Isaac was designated along the way to have been the one that the blessings were going to come through. Now, we don't even have the promises mentioned to Isaac before we're introduced to Jacob and Esau in chapter 25. And that's because that's going to create a lot of tension in that household. And so we're going to look more at that tension this evening. But in chapter 25, I guess there's two key events that happen in 25. One of them is the death of who? Abraham. And the second one would have to do with Jacob and Esau. Maybe their birth would be significant. Well, what happens with the birthright there? Yeah, it goes to the younger. So it was promised to the younger already in the womb. And then maybe we don't know how that's going to play out, but we see how it does in chapter 25 at the end where Esau sells his birthright. And we were talking about just a minute. I think I mentioned something the other day, maybe it was Sunday night, about the difference between the birthright and the blessing. I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill about that. I wasn't trying to be confusing about that. All I want to say about that is this, that just because a son might have been receiving the greater portion doesn't mean he's the one through whom the promises are going to come. And Isaac seems to disregard what God says in chapter 25. And I think we'll look at that as we come to chapter 26. But God always intended that it would be Jacob through whom the blessings were going to come. And he always intended, it seems to me, that he would be the one the birthright would come through. And those things maybe not are always tied together, but they were tied together for Jacob. And so we'll look at that more as we go. Anything else that you think that we need to pick up on, Mr. Gerald, that I left out as we come into chapter 26? Okay, so there's a famine in the land. This is chapter 26 and verse 1. Besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. Now, what would Abraham do in this situation? What did he do in this situation? He would go down to Egypt, right? Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, and the Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go to Egypt. Dwell in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and I will give to your offspring all these lands. And in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." All right, so why, maybe we're speculating here a little bit, but why does he not need to go down to Egypt?
Well, if they all go down to Egypt, who's going to get blessed?
Yeah, okay.
The Egyptians. And what I'm saying is God undoubtedly don't want to actually bless the Egyptians, but he wants him to go to another place that he's going to bless with him.
Okay. All right. So what is the assurance that God gives so that he doesn't have to go down to Egypt? That land is theirs, and he will be with it, right? You are going to be blessed even in this place where things don't seem to be going well. Now, I don't know if we can read this back onto the Abraham story, But it seems to me that God does not want Isaac to learn the lesson that his father would have taught by his example in this regard. He doesn't want Isaac to go to Egypt when there's a famine in the land. He wants him to rely on the faithfulness of God. And as we'll see here, he does. Now, I like this in verse 5. Verse 5. The promises are repeated to him. Why are the promises repeated to Isaac? What does the text say there? Because Abraham obeyed. Now, I think there is a sense in which the promises that God made to Abraham were unconditional. Here's what I mean by that. When God called Abraham, it doesn't look like Abraham was even a believer in Yahweh exclusively. Joshua later will talk about Abraham and his family worshiping the gods that were in Mesopotamia. So I don't know. In fact, I think Acts 7, I think Stephen points to that they were in a foreign land and they were not believers in the Lord particularly. But Abraham's appropriate response to God's call meant that his family was going. So there's a sense in which it was unconditional. God chose Abraham. There's another sense in which, because of what Abraham was and because of what he did, that the promises were allowed to continue. It's like the promises that were made to the nation of Israel. There was a sense in which they hadn't done anything to deserve those things. But there was also a sense in which they could lose them, right? They could do some things to undeserve them very quickly. And in fact, they did do that. And so sometimes I think we try to take Abraham's responsibility out of this. And Abraham's response, in fact, Genesis 18, he says, I've chosen Abraham because I know he'll command his family concerning righteousness. And I think that theme is carried on here. Genesis 22, he says, because you have not withheld your only son, so I will not withhold from you. And so you have these remarks along the way where it is Abraham's faith and faithfulness that intensifies the promises of God to him and his family. Anything through verse 5 or so?
I like the way Bob Waldron puts it. He says, Abraham bestowed blessings upon Isaac, by doing this. But like you said, the way he conducted himself with the Lord, it brought blessings for Isaac. And,
that's good. That's a good way of thinking about it. That his faithfulness to God, even without him saying anything to Isaac, becomes a blessing to Isaac. Mm-hmm. That's good.
It also may be interesting to remember that Abraham did not want Isaac to leave, even to go get his wife or anything. It's like, this is the land that God has promised to us. And he had God saying the same kind of thing.
That's right. Isaac. So maybe Abraham learns a lesson through all of those experiences going to Egypt. Maybe he figures out, leaving is not the best option. And that's very good. Now, it is not inappropriate, I don't think. Obviously, it's not because the Lord did it, so everything he does is appropriate. But you can see that Isaac would have been influenced by his father, I think, because of what we see in the next story. So we'll pick up there.
Okay. So Isaac settled in Gerar. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, she is my sister. For he feared to say my wife, thinking lest the men of the place should kill me because of Rebekah, because she was attractive in appearance. When he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out of a window and saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah, his wife. So Abimelech called Isaac and said, behold, she's your wife. How then could you say she is my sister? Isaac said to him, because I thought lest I die because of her. Abimelech said, what is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, whoever touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. So just a carbon copy type scenario that is played out here. And Isaac plays it out the exact same way his father did in the past. That's interesting. You would have thought maybe this had been a conversation at some point in time. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe this was one of those things that was a secret thing as far as Abraham and Sarah. I don't know. But like father, like son, he carries the same path here. And again, these are moments, these are, fathers of the faith. And you have to ask, where is the faith on these occasions? And again, here's the humanity. I think this is the humanity of of the situation of how people react in times of pressure at times. And so he tries to pass her off. And of course, I think that in some of the language, this can be thought of as, well, not necessarily just wife, but kinsman, relative. Was he lying about that? Was Rebecca related to? She was. Sarah was related to Abram too, but still they were spouses. They were wives to these men. And so, I mean, there is clear deception taking place here. I don't know what it was, but somehow the way Isaac was with Rebekah give it away. It was up when Abimelech saw this occasion. And it's interesting here, I don't think this is probably the same Abimelech as in Abraham's story. This is some time has passed 40 plus years. But here you have a pagan king that did not serve Jehovah, but he seems to have a moral bone about himself that he even frowns on this situation and said, what are you doing? Are you trying to, bring cursings upon us? Are you trying to defile the land? What are you doing? Somebody could have lain with her, and we all would be touched by that, touched by the guilt of this. So, but he goes and makes a proclamation declaring that Rebekah is off limits.
Yeah, I think you're right that Abimelech here is probably not the same one. Abimelech is like the title Pharaoh. It was a dynastic title. So lots of kings would have been called Abimelech. That was just kind of like their royal title. The other thing is, so the New American Standard, when it says, I saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah, his wife, Lydia hadn't laughed at me since we've been married. She used to laugh at my jokes before we got married, but since then but the New American Standard translates that word laughing as caressing. And I think the word literally is laughing, but I think it's like, maybe it's like a euphemism for caressing. I think the idea is that there was something in the physical interaction between Isaac and Rebekah that gave away that they were more than brother or sister. And I've heard this passage applied, and I think it's appropriate. There is a way that a man and a woman would touch each other in public that would indicate that they're not just brother and sister, that they're married, right? And so that young men need to be careful. Most of the young men are not in here right now, but for the ones that are, that need to be careful about what they're doing that would leave the impression that they are, married if they're not married. And I think that's a useful thing to think about. As you may mention, Abimelech seems to have a moral sense. And remember that Abraham earlier, when he went, he said, well, I was afraid there was no fear of God in this place. It actually seemed like among them, there was more of a fear of God. Mm-hmm. They were more afraid of going against what God would want than Abraham was. And so you have God's promise, I'll be with you, I'll take care of you, I'm going to bless all nations through your seed. And then in the next paragraph, it's almost as if Isaac had not let God's promises soak into his circumstances, mm-hmm. right? And how often do we know the right thing intellectually, but we don't let it apply to the situations in which we find ourselves? We know God's promises are true. We know He is right. We know that doing what's right by Him is always the best thing. But then in our circumstances, somehow it's not the right thing. Somehow it's not the best thing to do. And we've got to learn to let God's promises soak into our circumstances. And when we do that, then we are living by faith. And in this instance, anyway, Isaac is not.
Maybe we compartmentalize our religion.
I think that's right.
And it doesn't always touch every aspect of our life.
Yeah, maybe we say do all in the name of the Lord here inside these walls. And we don't mean in word or in deed, in everything we do it by the authority and by the will of God. But we need to. And we need to be growing in that. And I think that's, as you may mention, that's one of the great lessons of Isaac and of Abraham, is they were not perfect, but they are still called faithful. And that's a great promise for us. Even as we can criticize and maybe we see the problem in ourselves, we also see the provisions that God has made to allow us to be called faithful. All right. Anything else through verse 11 that you guys would like to say?
I think that's why we have their lives recorded the way they are.
Yeah.
So when we see their imperfections and we can relate to that.
That's right.
A little further later, when we see how strong they are,
Mhm.
we need to know that that's also attainable.
Yeah.
Yep.
Amen.
Good point.
Yeah, that's very good. All right, so in verse 12, and Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. He had possessions of flocks and herds and many servants, so that the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are much mightier than we." Why don't I go ahead and read one more paragraph? So Isaac departed from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. And Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, which the Philistines had stopped after the death of Abraham. And he gave them the names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdmen, saying, "The water is ours." So he called the name of the well Esek, or contention, because they contended with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that also. So he called its name Sitnah, or strife. And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth, saying, "For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land." All right, so what happens to Isaac initially? What do we first read about him? How is his success in the land? He's very successful. God blesses him, it says 100-fold. I think that there is a lesson in that for the people who would have first read this. That is the Israelites who are going in. At almost the same time that they're receiving this, they are hearing Moses say, "When you go into the land, if you will listen to him and you will be faithful to them, he will bless you beyond measure. He will bless your fields. He will bless your prosperity. He will bless your fertility. He will bless you." And if you want to know if that's true, just look at your forefather Isaac. God blessed him in the land. And if you want that blessing, if you want the same thing that your father's got, you're going to have to be faithful. Now, that does not mean that Isaac did not have to face difficulty. In fact, he's being chased around, it seems, by these Philistines. So he must be very good at witching wells, right? Isn't that what it's called?
Yeah.
So he must be very good at it because he's finding it. And the Philistines just keep driving him off because evidently they're not very good at it. And they need him to find their wells for him.
Well, too, he's got servants digging them.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
if they miss, oh well.
Yeah. Labor is easy when it's not you doing
Sure,
it.
sure it is.
That's good. But all of these names mean something. And I love Rehoboth there. The Lord's made room for us. Moses would be telling the people of Israel, God's making room for you. And he will bless you. And he will give you room there. And you'll be fruitful if you'll trust in him.
Along digging the well, says that he called the names after which his father had called him. So
Yeah.
the areas where they were going that had been filled up, it wasn't like there was a witch. They already knew that it was water.
Yeah.
It was like
yeah.
gold.
Yeah, I think in verse 18 he's digging the old wells, but I'm thinking he's having to dig new wells from verse 20 on because they've driven him away from the wells of Abraham. So he's having to find new ones. But you're exactly right. He's redigging the wells of Abraham. And I heard lessons growing up about redigging the wells of Abraham. And they would always be lessons about going back to kind of the fundamental truths that we've known for a long time. But we're always having to redig the wells of Abraham. Because along the way, what will happen? People come and throw their religious clutter in them. And we got to go back and we got to dig the well. So that is not at all what the passage is saying. But I always think about that sermon when I think about digging the wells of Abraham. And it's a good point, even though it's not at all what this is talking about. So anyway. Do what? Yeah, please do. I'm not guaranteeing an answer, but you can ask all you want to.
So, that verse 12,
Mhm.
and you may have said this, I may have missed it. When it says, Isaac sowed in that land reaped in the same year as 100-fold.
Mhm.
In the year of the famine, like as this famine is going on, do you think that may be maybe emphasis of
Maybe that
I don't know.
that's possible.
Because that would be
It would certainly be indicative of God's blessing if that's true. I don't know how much time has passed in this with the Abimelech situation, but the fact that God said, "I'll be with you," I had not made that connection. but it's in that very same context. I don't think there's any reason to think about a long passage of time there. That's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. If it's true or not, I don't care. I like it. I don't mean that.
What do you think about this, him becoming rich and very wealthy? Obviously, the blessings of Abraham, he was already that way, but you think this is talking about, him leaving that behind when they go to Gerar and starting over in a sense, what he's taken from the Philistines?
Yeah, maybe.
And separate and apart from what he'd already had?
Yeah. I don't know. And think about, again, the Israelites who are reading this first. They had had a similar experience in slavery in Egypt, right? God blessed them so much that they became mightier than the Egyptians in one sense, and the Egyptians started oppressing them. So maybe in some way, this is a record of a long track record of God blessing his people so much so that the people around them are afraid of them. And he wants them to see that. He wants them to be reminded that, I've been doing this for your people for a long, long time. But yeah, I think a lot of their wealth probably would have been movable, right, in livestock and things like that, but not all of it. And so having to move again would be a difficult undertaking with all that livestock anyway, regardless of if they're taking it with them or not. Okay, anything else? I think that's true too. There are lots of indications that God is making provisions for there to be distance between them. So whether it's the wives that they're marrying, or whether it's where they are and are not supposed to go, or maybe providentially, like nothing miraculous is, well, maybe the hundredfold produces, but there's nothing miraculous about Abimelech asking Isaac to leave. But that does serve a purpose. It does accomplish something. And maybe that might be a lesson, thinking about how famines accomplish purposes in the book of Genesis, right? Famine accomplishes a purpose here by creating distance when he's blessed and they're not. And it's a blessing in, later chapters when they have to go down to Egypt to look for bread, and there's Joseph there to provide it. So, God can use those famines to provide blessings.
It seems like the Philistines messing with whales is God somewhat pushing him.
That's right. Yeah, I agree with that. That's good. All right. You want to take, where did we get to? 23, 22? 23.
Yeah, 23.
Yeah.
23 through 33, let's say.
I must be losing my eyesight because I can't say these numbers like I could last week. I'm a little nervous right now. So.
Wait till you get my age.
Been waiting a long time. I'm just kidding.
It don't get no better, I can promise you that. All right, 23. From there he went up to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I am the God of Abraham, your father. Fear not, for I am with you and will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake. So he built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord, and pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants dug a well. There's the servants.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there you go. Then Abimelech went to him from Gerar with Ahuzzath, his advisor, and Phicol, the commander of his army. Isaac said to them, Why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me and have sent me away from you? They said, We see plainly that the Lord has been with you. So we said, Let there be a sworn pact between us, between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you, that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you and have done to you nothing but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord. So he made them a feast, and they ate and drank. In the morning they rose early and exchanged oaths. And Isaac sent them on their way, and they departed from him in peace. That same day Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had dug, and said to him, We have found water. He called it Sheba. Therefore the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. So he is in Beersheba. He establishes himself there, and the Lord appears to him again and tells him, Fear not, I am with you. I will bless you. If there was any question about that, he reaffirms that on this occasion. And again, he repeats it. Why is he doing this? He's doing this for Abraham's sake, for my servant Abraham's sake. Verse 24. So Isaac built an altar there and calls upon the name of the Lord. And so he pitches his tent. So he sets himself there firmly. Abimelech comes to him. And again, here's another, this sounds very familiar. We've seen this happen with Abraham, Isaac's father. Same thing. The Lord has blessed both Abraham and Isaac so well that these men are drawn to try to make a peace treaty with them because they see how great and powerful and everything they do is prospering. They're doing very well. And so these men want to make a coalition with them. And so Abimelech does that very thing, wants to make a coalition with Isaac. And so they make this covenant. And we see the exchange of food on this occasion as part of the ceremony of this covenant. And so they exchange oaths. And as they depart, news comes that the servants of Isaac have found water in the well that they. And again, here the name of the place was already Beersheba for a different reason, because you remember Abraham, when he made a covenant, there was the exchange of the 7 new lambs. And so the name came from the 7. But on this occasion, the name, even though it remains the same, it's based more upon the oaths that was taken. And so it is Beersheba to this day.
Yeah, I was thinking about that this afternoon, and I think in some way the oath here, it reaffirms the name Beersheba. And I was actually asking Lonnie about it because I thought, well, this is not the reason it was named Beersheba. It was named Beersheba, but there's a similar instance with Esau. Do you remember this? Oh, he was named Esau, which means red. But why was he named Esau in the first place? Because of his hairy red hair. Red hair. I think that's the case at the end of 25. But then the stew was red stew, and so his people are called Edom, which means red. And so I think the idea is that something else happens along the way that reaffirms, yeah, we named him right. And this happens, it's like, yeah, that well was named appropriately because it's renamed. And at the same time, it was named the Well of the 7, but that was an oath, a previous oath with Abimelech, right? There was an agreement, maybe the previous Abimelech, that they would not fight over this well anymore. So yeah, I think that's exactly right. That it's reasserting the appropriateness of the name, and in this location, Beersheba, we sometimes talk about Dan to Beersheba, that being the whole of the land of Israel. When you get down that far south in Beersheba, there is not much water available. So the fact that there are wells there it's pretty much the only thing that makes life possible there, because without wells, you would not have a water source. And so that's an important marker for the boundaries of Israel.
One thing didn't mention there in verse 23, it says from there he went up to Beersheba. Yeah. So Gerar is north from there, but he says he goes up as he's traveling south. Of course, we know that typically when the Bible's speaking that way, it's talking in elevation and not geography. Yeah. So
yeah, if you have in your mind's eye Gerar, I think it would be kind of in the coastal plain where we typically associate the Philistines. And so as you move more inland, you're going up from sea level into the hill country. So Beersheba is going to be on the very south end of that, but it's still going to be a higher elevation than, for example, Gerar or Gaza or some of those other coastal cities by the Mediterranean. Okay, very good. Just 2 verses left in chapter 26. When Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah, which is every daughter-in-law's dream to have that said about them, right? To make your in-laws' life bitter. No comment to all the daughter-in-laws who are here in the audience. Now, what do you think makes this bitter to Isaac and Rebekah? Why would it be so bitter?
From the people that God didn't want them to actually have any dealings with them.
That's right.
That's why Isaac, his father, sent to his brother for his wife. Yeah. Because he didn't want nobody around.
Very good. So what do we know about the Canaanites? And the Hittites would have been a people who were living in Canaan at this time. What do we know about the Canaanites in general? Idol worshipers, wicked, right? I think they would be characterized by sexual immorality. So Genesis 15, as Mr. Steve's making mention, God tells Abraham, their iniquity is not yet full, just because it's not full doesn't mean there's not any in the cup, you know. And that's at best we know the direction they're headed, and that's not ideal. And so Esau doing this, in some ways, I think it just shows a disregard for the plan of God. And maybe it's another example of the short-term thinking of Esau. And so, anyway, maybe there's more to say about all that, but I don't know what else to say other than that. Anything? Yes, sir.
And I know we've talked about this before, and this is not the only example we see it, but
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Would that have been considered rebellious in the first place? Going back to what God's plan for marriage was anyway, or was that something that would have not been so rebellious and been more commonplace?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I don't ever think that it was God's ideal, but I'm not sure how much there was revelation about like a specific prohibition or even God's displeasure with such a thing, other than what. So when Genesis is written down, it's way after Jacob and Esau are already gone off the scene. So I don't know, mostly because of Abraham. I would say that with Abraham, the model that they're looking at was not ideal in this either. And so, but maybe they would not have viewed it as rebellious with that, because Jacob is going to do the same thing. Now he's going to do it with better women, I think. But doesn't matter how good they are. If you got 4 of them, you're in trouble. So, you know.
But it does seem to always emphasize consequences.
It does
in doing that.
Yeah, that's right.
And in this case, that's what I was kind of thinking. With them both being Canaanites, kind of double the trouble.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to phrase it.
Yeah. Very good.
Larson, do you think there's some connection to, you mentioned earlier that the Israelites reading this, the time it was about coming to the land.
Yeah.
And there's warnings. You've seen the Philistines be mentioned.
Yes.
And kind of they're coming back in and covering up the wells or taking the wells. And then now you have Esau marrying Hittite women. And that's a prohibition of the law. Don't marry women from the country around it. And it's specified here they brought Isaac and Rebecca. So already laying that foundation groundwork for the dangers of people who don't worship God, don't know God.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I did not appreciate this. I don't even think I appreciated it the last time I taught through Genesis. How much I think maybe every story here, one of the questions we should be asking is, how would they have read it as they're about to enter the land of Canaan? Because that's who Moses was writing it down for first. Now, of course, it's for us. It's God's inspired word, and it has application to us. But I think as we make the application to them first, then putting it in that right context, that right historical context, I think then we can make better applications for ourselves. And I think that's exactly right. Maybe every paragraph we should be asking, what would this have said to the first Israelites who read this? And it would have said, do not marry the people who are in this land. It will make your life bitter. Right? And it will make the life bitter of your parents who care about doing right. And so that's a very good point to make.
And the other thing, when you're saying that the Israelites read this, I mean, the Bible back then wasn't like we have today. Everybody had a copy if they check out something other than reading. They had to have the priest get before the people.
Yeah.
And read it to them, and it's in rows of scrolls. It wouldn't be like verse such and such. It just say in the book of Genesis, and as they went down and read, they'd say, this is about the flood, this is about Abraham, but it wasn't no book, chapter, and verse like what we have today. But I'm sure that God actually used the priesthood at different times of the day to actually read to the whole congregation his word, to give them guidance on what Moses is telling them about going into the land.
Yeah, and they were to have special occasions where they came together and read this, and cultures like that before the invention of a lot of writing would have been experts at remembering these stories and passing them on to their children, just in a narrative form rather than being written in a spoken form.
Yeah, oral
And so
tradition.
they would have been. Really, I think you see this in Deuteronomy, right? You talk about these things to your children when they lie down, when they rise up. That's the way that these stories would be passed down, would be to the children, and they needed to remember this story too when they're passing that down. That's very good. All right. Anything else in chapter 26? Okay, I think we're ready for chapter 27, if you are.
Mm-hmm. When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." He answered, "Here I am." He said, "Behold, I am old, and I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out in the field and hunt game for me, and prepare for me delicious food such as I love, and bring it to me so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die." Now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "I heard your father speak to your brother Esau. Bring me game and prepare for me delicious food that I may eat it and bless you before the Lord before I die. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice as I command you. Go to the flock and bring me 2 young goats so that I may prepare from them delicious food for your father, such as he loves. And you shall bring it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before he dies." But Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, "Behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be mocking him, and bring a curse upon myself and not a blessing." His mother said to him, "Let your curse be upon me, my son. Only obey my voice and go and bring them to me." So here's the situation. Here, Isaac seems determined to give the blessing to Esau. He would be fully aware that Esau has lost the birthright, and maybe he feels obligated to, I don't know, give him something. So he's intended on giving the blessing to Esau, and so he sends Esau out to obtain food, to kill, prepare, that he may eat, and that he may bless him. But who's listening in on this conversation? Rebekah. Now, we've already read, that little bit of division earlier. Who loved who? Yeah, Isaac loved Esau, Rebekah loved Jacob. You see that, and you see that playing out right here in this very, very story. Isaac's will, everybody knows what Isaac's will here, but the mother's will is different. And so they're working against each other here, and they're playing the brothers against each other here.
It also shows that Rebecca had to be some more cook, because you've ever ate goat, you've ever ate deer. Goat's straining meat, and deer has got a whole different taste than goat. So however she prepared these 2 goats, and whatever spices she put into it, to the point that you couldn't tell that you was eating goat, you think you're eating deer. She had to be an excellent cook.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how dull Isaac's senses were,
Yeah.
Because the deception is a lot more obvious between the deer and the goat and Esau and Jacob.
Have you eaten goat? I've never eaten goat. So.
It's been a long time. I don't know, but
I might have to test this out. Somebody bring me goat, somebody bring me deer, and that'll just be investigation for Bible class if somebody can do something. Who's doing right in chapter 27? Who's acting right? Nobody. Nobody's doing right. Right? It doesn't, I think Isaac, not only would he know about the birthright, I think he would know about what God said to Rebekah in chapter 25
right.
about the younger serving the older.
Mm-hmm.
Older serving the
older.
And it's like he's attempting to overthrow God's plan. And especially, and we won't be able to finish this tonight, but if you look at verses 28 and 29, this is what he thinks he's saying to Esau. "May God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down before you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you." Well, I can only think of one other person that would apply to. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. It sounds to me like he is specifically referencing the promise that was made to Rebekah and saying, no, we're going to do it the other way. He thinks he's talking to Esau there. He doesn't think he's talking to Jacob. So first of all, I don't think he's doing right. Esau knows he's sold out, right? Rebekah's not doing right. She knows that this is deception. And then you've got Jacob. And the thing that strikes me about Jacob is, perhaps he'll feel me, I shall seem to be mocking him, and bring a curse on myself and not a blessing. What's he concerned about? Himself. He's concerned about the consequences.
Getting caught.
He doesn't stop and say, like Joseph, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against my God? He says, well, what if something bad happens, right? What if I get caught? And that's not real. That's not a real genuine heart of contrition or maybe not even contrition of concern about God's will. So nobody's doing right. Now, all that being said, what's going to end up happening in this? Just in the overall sense, God's will, right? God's will. God is still going to accomplish His purposes even through the wicked and foolish actions of men. And if there's no other lesson from the book of Genesis we learn, then that might be the lesson we need to learn, is that even when evil and ungodly men are at work, God will accomplish His purposes. And we'll either be on board with that, or we'll be toast in the face of that, because He's going to accomplish His will. And we'll see more. I think Jacob just goes deeper and deeper into a problem here.
One thing that you can take from when you actually read, even though in our opinion that one's doing wrong and one's deceiving, there's no description in all these scriptures that God condemns any of them of what they have done and goes ahead and blesses them. And then He already foretold to Rebekah what was going to happen. And I think if it was something other that it was against God's will, even though they had choices, I think He would actually came out and told.
I don't think that's true.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
And here's why I say that. I don't think we have any definitive statement that what Abraham did with Hagar, that God condemned it. Now we see the consequences of it, and we see that God does not accept the repercussions of it, but that's the same thing we have here, right? We have the consequences, and we see that God does not accept what Isaac's plan is here. Also, I'm not sure that we have any specific condemnation, like when Abraham goes down and lies about Sarah being his. I don't think we have a specific passage that says that Abraham did wrong in that. Now, Abimelech, the king, was wrong for if he had laid with her. But it's interesting to me that he was the one that was going to be condemned, and nothing said about Abraham. I say all that to say just this, that I don't think we can take the limits. I don't think we can take a story being reported as evidence that it was acceptable. There's no condemnation of Esau's polygamy with the Hittite women specifically. It just says he was made Isaac and Rebekah's life better. But anyway, and I'm not saying that to be just dismissive. I just think that as we read this story, knowing what God had promised and knowing that lying is wrong, I think we should conclude that they are not acting right in this.
Deception of any kind.
Yes, that's right. I think that's right.
And, you think about God. Is he capable to look ahead and see how this would unfold and being able to use it for good?
Yeah.
Did he not use the same thing with Egypt, Pharaoh in Egypt?
That's right.
Same thing.
Yeah. And that what I'm saying is different than saying that God knew they were going to do this. He
Right.
may very well have known they were going to do it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't approve or disapprove of
Exactly.
their actions. So, yeah, go ahead, Austin.
Do you think it would have mattered if Isaac blessed Esau instead?
I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah. There does seem to be power in these blessings, weight in these blessings. It may have been a situation like Balaam, who was caused to curse the people of Israel
When he
and
couldn't.
when it came time, he wanted, if there was anybody who wanted to curse him badly, it was Balaam, and he just couldn't. And when the moment came, he said, I cannot but say what God is putting in my mouth. So maybe it would have been one of those situations. But yeah, I don't know. If you're Jacob, you have to count on something like that, don't you? Like you have to rely that God is going to accomplish His purposes without me lying about it. And so I think later in Scripture, seeing that God was able to do something like that, maybe we read back onto this and say, God could have done anything He wanted to, right? God could have given a blessing through a donkey or something. He could have done whatever He wanted to make sure He was going to get it. But Rebecca and Jacob both think they have to scheme in order to get it. So that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's the hill grabber, isn't he? All right. Well, we are out of time. I really appreciate your comments and discussion, and I'm very thankful to be able to be studying the book of Genesis with you. So we'll pick up there, Lord willing. Is Sunday night singing night?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it the 31st? We got one. I think we have one more, and then it'll be singing. Yeah. So we'll be all right.
If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.